Hello, everyone. Before getting into today's episode, I just wanted to take the time and acknowledge everything that's going on in our country. Now, in the episode that you're getting ready to listen to, we talked about a lot of the current events, and we realized that some of this material and the content discussed is very sensitive. But we also wanted to let you know that we tried to focus on what we can do better as a country and as a people. We also discussed these from our own personal vantage points. We realized that there are so many different dynamics and moving parts to what's going on in our country, and not one person has the answer. So please understand that the material that you are about to listen to is that of our own perspective and our own experience, and how the recent current events have impacted our life and our perspectives. I hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, this is Desiree and you are listening to God Applied. This is one of the first episodes we're going to be doing, and I have to be honest with you, I did not think that I was going to hop into a topic so heavy, but given what's going on in our nation, in our country right now, we definitely had to talk about this. So today, we are not in the studio. I am visiting my sister, and we wanted to take just a few minutes and talk to you guys about what's going on with recent events. But before we go any further, Rhonda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm her sister.
Rhonda is my sister, and this is someone that I really wanted to do this episode with because I respect her so much. Plus, she has so much insight and so many different perspectives that I really thought was worth hearing and sharing with you guys. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So as many of you guys know, you know what's going on in the nation right now. And within our country in regards to Black Lives Matter, and so many Black men losing their lives because of, police brutality, racism, profiling, however you want to phrase it. And so it was a topic that I really felt that we needed to address. And I really wanted to hear, first of all, what was your reaction when you first saw the video of George Floyd?
Well, I would say my first reaction, first of all, this is not a video of something that I would ever watch. Just because my heart can't take things like that. I really feel like, oh my goodness.
I'm the same way.
Maybe I'm too emotional. I don't know what it is, but it was something that I never would have imagined myself watching. But obviously it was right after Memorial Day weekend. It was Tuesday. I was back at work, working from home because of COVID. Mm-hmm. And I had seen someone post something on Facebook about another incident of racism that had happened over the Memorial Day weekend. And I had watched that video and I was like, oh my goodness, that's so crazy. So when this video came up, I was like, I am absolutely gonna click on it. And so I clicked on it and I began watching and I was like, okay, well, where is this going? Mm-hmm. And the more the video proceeded to play, I felt within myself, my heart rate increase. Yeah. And I genuinely was like, oh my goodness, God, what is about to happen? I don't like this. This makes me uncomfortable. And by the time it was even before the video was over, I literally was in tears. Yeah. And I was like, oh my goodness, my heart felt just a great amount of grief. Yeah. And sadness. And as soon as the video was over, I immediately sent it to my husband and was like, sweetheart, I am in tears right now, because he was at work. I was like, you need to watch this. You need to know what's going on and all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. So I would say that was my ultimate reaction, but it was just definitely a heaviness. And it wasn't something that was it was heaviness for a moment. But I would say that even since then, it's something it's continuing, and the gravity of it is still resting on me.
No, I agree. And I have to be honest, when I started hearing stuff about it with social media, I did not run to it because it's not just happy-go-lucky news, and so I have to be honest, I avoided watching it for a while. And I heard some people say, it wasn't just what actually happened when he was on the ground, but when they started talking about, other videos have surfaced about what happened prior to that, because my question was, okay, what did he do? What happened before this moment? And I seen the video where they were like getting him out of the car, and I have to be honest, I clicked on it. It was like a 2-minute video, and it showed him, getting out of the car, and then they put him against a wall, and he sat down, and then they stood him up. And then it kind of cuts off from there. And I kept clicking like, well, am I missing something?
Exactly.
And I'm like, you mean that was it?
That was it.
That was the resisting arrest? And I kept searching. I'm like, no, there must be more videos where a fumble or
that's what it
rumble,
led you
a
to believe
fight happened.
Absolutely. I feel like that's what it led you to believe when you just watched the first video and you hear the police officer, he says, oh, don't do drugs, kids. And I was thinking like, okay, maybe like there's more to the story.
Which is honestly such a racial slur and remark to throw that out there. And he said it to the guy standing on the street as well.
Exactly. And I think this is at first, when I was like, well, was he resisting before? I'm like, were they over there trying to handcuff him at first? That was when I first started watching the video. That's what I thought. But I'm like, okay, this has been too long. Like, but this is not just he's resisting and you can't handcuff him or put him in the car.
Right. And I think I seen something else that said they literally had him down for 8 minutes.
Yeah.
And for about 4 minutes, he wasn't moving before they did anything. And I think the only reason they did get off of him is because the paramedics finally showed up.
Exactly.
And for me, I looked at their demeanor afterwards. They were just like, okay, let's get up. Let's get in the car.
Yeah.
Let's, here on the stretcher. I think they knew what happened. They knew he wasn't responsive. And they did not react. And there are parts of the video, because I started to watch very closely, where you can see where the officer, moments where he leaned in harder. And it was like, goodness. Are you kidding me? And the moment where you see where he kind of stopped being responsive and someone from the street tried to step in and he pulls his mace. Yeah. And it was like, okay, clearly they're going to help. They're trying to help. And if they could have, they would have escalated the situation even further, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely.
But there were too many cameras. There were too many other things happening. And they were just going to pack up and go home.
And I think what was interesting is what this has been like on the way in which on social media this has been presenting. People are saying like this is just a modern day lynching. And at first I thought to myself, wow, that's a really strong term to use.
It is.
And then when I thought back to the video, I'm like, that's exactly what this was, especially once the other video surfaced that there was nothing more going on. This man, he was following directions. You walked him over to, the building. You put the handcuffs on him. You have him sit down. Like there was no resisting. You intentionally sought out this opportunity.
Yes.
And then when you hear about why the police were called, even from the beginning, where the young woman had, she said she thought there was a forgery and, he had possibly paid with a fake $20 bill. To think, okay, the police got called for something that I guess in my mind I would think, wouldn't that be like a feds thing? Like the feds, like the Federal Reserve is responsible for the money, not necessarily our civil men in blue. What are they going to do?
Right.
And I mean, maybe that's ignorant speaking, but in my mind, that's how I process that. So if that's why he was called, why would that lead to this? Nothing. Yeah. They didn't say.
And at no point in time did he react and act crazy and be so defensive that it would cause them to get to that place. There was absolutely no reason for it.
So yeah, when I definitely seen the comparison to say that this is a modern day lynching, I would say 100% that's exactly what this was. And
it's so scary to think about, especially as someone who's helping raise 2 little boys right now, constantly. Like they have to realize that when you're in public, you do have to act differently, and I don't know if people consider that children of color, when they're in public, your kid can't just be a kid. They need to be aware of their surroundings, who's watching them. And it's not because of anything that they've done, but it could simply just be the color of their skin. And when I think about, my boys, 6 and 4, they don't understand that people might not want to be friends with you because of the color of your skin, or you could get in trouble, if people see you doing things that other people are doing that are in your age group, that are in your class. You can't do what everyone else does because unfortunately it's not the same. And the consequences for you are much greater.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's really hard to like grasp. And I don't know, maybe this all hit me differently because you hear things where people talk about raising young black men, and it's different because I did just have
a
son.
Yeah.
And so maybe this hit a little differently. Obviously, I've always been concerned for, the boys or my husband or just cousins, different things like that. But I feel like it hit differently, and I was like, oh my goodness, like this is
Because
real life.
You think about the Trayvon Martins. You think about so many other people. Like, he's just a kid walking down the street, or he's just going out for a job.
Exactly.
And so I think, where we are in this nation is, well, I want to pull up something that I talked to you and your husband about a while ago, because he pulled out a perspective for me that I never thought of. And it's just the difference between people of color in America. And so you and I are Black Americans.
Yes,
and
I'm Black.
We are Black Americans, but your husband is African American.
Yeah, technically, yes.
Technically, he's African.
Yes, he's born and raised in Ethiopia.
And he has citizenship
in America.
So
which would make him technically an African American.
And your children are African American.
Absolutely.
But you are a Black.
I am a Black American.
And the difference between his perspective on things and our perspective on things. And I can remember recently traveling with some friends down to Atlanta. And while we were there, we definitely decided to look into some of the museums and the history of Martin Luther King. And while we were taking that tour, there was a group of Africans there in the museum, and someone asked them, they said, how do you view this history? And they said, well, it's interesting that they had to go through that. They had to go through that. And I paused for a moment, and it really made me think. They said, well, this is not my history. This is their history. And because my history is a complete, not that they didn't have their own oppression and their own things that they battled, but they said the civil rights movement, that type of slavery, that type of abuse, that's not their backstory. But when you're Black and you're in America, sometimes we can get lumped together, but sometimes I still think that there is a distinction. And there, to me, seems to be a direct target against Black Americans, because if you are from another country, sometimes I think there's still more grace in the sense that you're seen as exotic, or people like your culture or your accent, and so there's different interests, or they put you at a different intellectual level.
Absolutely.
Versus if you are Black American, and this is what he pointed out for me when we went to go see the movie Black Panther, right? And I don't know if you remember this movie, but we went to go see Black Panther, and everybody is walking around Wakanda forever, Wakanda forever. And I said, well, what did you think of the movie? And he was like, I don't understand why you guys like the movie so much. I said, what do you mean? It was a really good movie. He said, do you not realize that you were still painted out to be the bad guy? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, in the movie, you have these people who are supposed to be, it's a made up land, who are supposed to be African, and they are the superheroes, and they're the people that everybody wants to be saved. Everybody's cheering for them. And the Black American was the person that was still the bad guy. The villain. And yet the white guy came in and was still the hero. He said, do you not realize that that's the narrative that America paints to every country?
That
terrible. Black America is bad. And he said, honestly, when I came, I had certain perceptions of what Black people were going to be like.
Yes.
When I got here, because of the message that I'm being fed. And there are so many other countries that are being fed that message that's directly targeted against Black America. And yet we, in that moment, as Black Americans, were so ignorant of it, because the Black American in that movie was still painted as the bad guy.
Wow.
And it blew my mind. I said, you were absolutely right. They said, and the white man was the hero.
My goodness, that's...
And it's so crazy, because like I said, we didn't see it. And I know so many people still walk around Wakanda forever. Like I don't Wakanda no more after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the perspective difference is huge when you think about the perspective of a Black American like myself and an African American, which my husband is. And I think for me personally, because I get so exposed to both sides of it. Obviously, I know what I grew up in. I know what I am. I know how I relate to the world in which I have lived it, my experience.
Right.
And being around my husband and his family, who obviously they're all Ethiopian born and raised, except for his like nieces and nephews. And even still, they're like in the middle of this. I don't know if I'm Black or I don't know if I'm Ethiopian or which narrative do I follow exactly. Because for my husband in particular, he comes from Ethiopia, where Ethiopia is the only country in Africa that's never been colonized. So knowing bondage and slavery, the way in which we, and even other African countries, they don't know that in the same regard. Like they're prideful. Like, yes, we beat the Italians. We are the ones who go and help fight civil wars for other countries. And so I would say that in his mindset, it's really like, well, I don't understand. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a great person. Like why would I be considered less?
Yeah.
And obviously our history shows that we've been oppressed for as long as we've been on this continent.
Since as long as we were dragged here.
Exactly. So I guess long before we were even dragged here.
Yeah.
And so the way in which my perspective is viewing it, it's kind of like, man, can we really be that different? And so even when I shared this video with him, and he got home and I said, sweetheart, did you watch the video? And he said, honey, I couldn't watch the video. I said, what do you mean you couldn't watch the video? Like you had like 10 minutes at work to like watch the video. He says, no, like I read the description of the video and the breakdown like of the article stating what happened. He goes, and it just broke my heart. He said, so I couldn't like literally watch the video. It made me so sad. It was infuriating to think that these people would do this. Like how he already like has these perspectives of like, how dare somebody do something like this? Like he's human. So he very much so was against it. Very much so was like, we have to fight against this. We need to do something different. This is an outrage. However, it didn't sit with him and weigh on him the way that it sat and weighed on me. Like me, I felt like, oh my goodness, this is almost like you're targeting my identity.
Yes.
You're targeting everything that I am and everything that I can't change about myself.
Everything that you can produce.
Exactly. And that was heavy. And so I was curious to see how, based upon this, how I would see obviously my Black friends and my African friends and family respond to this on social media. And obviously I think we can look on social media and see a lot of our friends and family going off saying various different things. But what I noticed among my Black friends and the posts and the statuses that I would see, they landed with me. Because they were not just like, oh, when will this end? But it was literally like, you are, I think it comes back to that identity.
Yeah.
It was like, you're literally attacking me.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do this to me. You can't do this to my kid. You can't do this to my family. Like, this is everything that I am. And that's where it was landing among all of their social media posts. And obviously, having gone to college and working, you meet so many international people from different backgrounds. And obviously, my family, seeing the perspective of African Americans, those who, whether they be Nigerian or from Ghana or Ethiopia or Tanzania, like wherever they are from, seeing their perspective on it was very different. Most of them, obviously, they were against it. They were saying it was outrage. They were saying it was sad. They were saying that it was hard. But very few did I feel like it landed with the same way it did with those who would identify as just being Black. And I think that difference would also be how they identify themselves.
Yeah.
Because I did have some friends from like Jamaica and a couple even some from Ethiopia that would identify themselves as like, no, like we're Black Americans. And the posts and the statuses that I would see from them were very much so feeling like their identity was being challenged. But those who did not necessarily feel like their identity was challenged, it was kind of like, man, this is terrible. We have to do something to stop this. From you're hurting the country, you're hurting these people.
And this brings me back around to the fact that, do you feel like we have the support of all other minorities against this fight? Because sometimes I definitely feel like there are people that definitely do support, but I can't say that every minority does, because
not every minority.
Not every minority does. And to me, it's like, do you realize that?
But not every other minority identifies as brown or black.
This is
I
very
think
true.
if a minority identifies as black and brown, they're more likely to say, this is what I'm standing for.
Yeah.
And they're going to stand beside us.
Yeah. And the question is, how do we win this fight if minorities can't pull together? You know, and it is, we do as a people, as Black Americans, we need to figure out how we're going to fight this. And here's the thing. It's so hard. This fight is so hard because historically you can see we've tried peaceful protest, and we've seen how that has not been, in some regards we've made great strides, but in some regards it just became hidden.
Exactly. It took it from racism that was out in the open to saying, oh, this is now no longer politically correct. I am going to be more reserved in my racism. And it's become the systematic racism that perpetuates itself.
Exactly. So how is it that we can fight systematic racism? Because it's so hard. Fighting the system.
Exactly. And I think this is kind of what, like, and I believe I mentioned it to you about an equity training that I've been doing for work. And we were doing a particular module, and it was about racism. And I was super excited. I was like, yes.
Of course you were.
And I mean, I'm knowing my personality, it surprises me that I would be all about like, yeah, let's talk about racism. But it talked about, it said racism, if you view racism as a moving conveyor belt walkway. So if the racism is the moving conveyor belt walkway, and if you choose to just walk along with the moving walkway, you're going to perpetuate systematic racism.
Yeah.
If you choose to say, okay, well, I'm not going to walk along with it. I'm going to stand still and I'm going to do nothing, but I'm not going to say I'm for racism. You're still going to move along that walkway.
It's still pulling you in that direction.
It's still pulling you in that direction. And they said, well, what about if you say, okay, well, I'm going to say that I'm not a racist and I'm going to fight against this. And you begin to walk backwards against the current, I guess grain, whatever.
The walkway.
Whatever way the walkway is moving, it's still going to keep you in the same place unless you walk so aggressively that you can fight against what's pulling you. And I'm like, that is so true.
Yeah.
And this is why they say, like, when you see something, you have to really say something. You can't just say, oh, that's not good. You have to say, no, I disagree with that. I don't stand for this.
You can't just let it go.
It's not enough to say, and it broke it down in this training. It was like, it's not enough to say, oh, well, I have Black friends. That means nothing, because
that offends me so much.
Many racists have Black friends. They work
Absolutely.
with Black people. They go to lunch with Black people on occasion. They interact with the rest of the world, but that doesn't mean that they're not racist. So that is not enough of an argument to say, oh yes, I'm not a racist because I know Black people, or I work with Black people, or I'm nice to Black people.
Right.
So what, you're nice to them, but do you recognize the struggle that they're in?
Right.
Do you sympathize with that?
Are you willing to
defend that?
Yeah.
Do you see them as your equal, or do you always see them as a lesser than? Because we always talk about white supremacy, but there's supremacy of every race.
Yes, there is.
No matter what you feel, if you think that another race or another ethnicity is less than who you are, there's an issue.
There is an issue.
Guess what?
And that's what it comes down to.
We were all created by one God.
Yeah.
We were all created in His image. So therefore, there is no discrepancy or no difference in the identity in which He's given each and every one of us.
Yeah. And you know what? That hit so many things for me. And I think we do live in a world that is so complicated, because if things aren't black and white, and I begin to think of how there are so many people that we know and that are in our family that are biracial, and the struggles that they have identifying with one side or the other. Now, when it's instances of being black and white, we know that society dominantly views that person as being black. And where does that come from? That comes from, you look at biologically how they want to define a white person is they define it by, you heard the drop of blood, but they say if you have anything black, if your eyes are black, if your hair is black, you are not really considered to be a white person. So if you have any feature that is black, in color, you are not what is considered to be a pure white race
and
person.
That's Hitler. That's what that is. That's Hitler.
Yeah.
Because that's why they you hear these people say, "Oh, I'm not white, I'm Greek."
Exactly.
I'm not white. I'm not white. I'm
Italian.
Italian. I'm Irish. You hear all these.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so when you look at, like I said, people who are biracial and how do they identify? And I might identify as a black person, but yet my mom still might be a white woman. My grandparents might still be, white. And yet, you might have your father, or vice versa. Your father might be a white man, but you might be considered a black woman or a black man. And what is that dynamic? And that's a dynamic that I don't think that we talk about enough either. And the struggle that creates in so many different people and them finding their balance in the world. Because sometimes mixed race people, they get hate from both ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely.
From people you're like, well, you're really not white. And then black people who are like, well, you're really not black. You're mixed or you're white, and so it comes from so many different perspectives. And I think for me, as I just begin to pray over all of these issues, what hit my heart, and I said, you know what, God, I need the people who are putting themselves in that position to take other people's lives, and that hate. It honestly reminded me of Paul. And it reminded me of who at the time was Saul, because at the time, he thought he was doing the right thing, and I can't say that people in these instances think that they're doing the right thing. I don't know what they're thinking, but in my mind, I have to say, God, I need these people to have like the road of Damascus experience. I need them to have that experience that God would, for this country, would literally blind some people or put some people, pull them out of their position, sit them down, humble them, and then allow God to come in and make the changes and the adjustments. Because honestly, I think that's what's it's gonna take. And especially as someone who is a Christian, how do you fight systematic racism? How do you fight? Because you go to church and you have so many other races and people sitting around you, and they want to fight with you, but there's always that disconnect between you might fight for me, but you still don't really know my pain, And I think that only thing that is going to really allow us to be able to connect and fight against this is realizing that we all live on grace. Yeah. We all live on grace. And when you're talking about issues like this, it's hard to want to give that pass, especially when it's so personal, but I think of instances where God has told me, guess what? I love that person too. I love that person too. And, I'm reminded of the movie The Shack. Do you remember that? And after he had gone and he encountered the man who had basically killed and raped his young daughter. Yeah. And he's like, God,
I don't have it for him.
Yeah, I don't have that grace for him. I do not have that grace for him. And he said, well, are you going back to being the judge? And the reality of it is terrible. This is God keeps reminding me, I love them too. Let me be the judge. I love them too. Let me be the judge. And I have to swallow that and sit with that and allow my heart to get to that place, because sometimes it is so frustrating. You're like, it's my life and I've done nothing wrong. This is just an injustice. Exactly. There's no reason for it. But I think that my prayer truly is that everyone, as you said, who puts themselves above someone else and in a place of seniority over any race, and you begin to look at people and say, well, I want to change you, or you're subservient to me, or you are not enough, or I view you less than in any way, that God would allow them to have a road of Damascus experience and humble them to be able to say, you know what, first encounter me and realize the humility that you need to have and the grace that I extend to you. That allows you to have the life and the privilege that you think you have.
Yeah.
And bring them full circle to realize that it's really about the love of God.
Yes.
That we need to have and that we need to share.
And I mean, I think that's definitely something that's hard to swallow, just like you said, because at this time, as we know, like in Minneapolis or
Minneapolis,
they're rioting right now and they're protesting, and it's gone from peaceful to a whole lot less peaceful, where there's fire and tear gas and fights and all kinds of things happening. There's anger.
Yeah.
There's just like the hurt and the anger and the frustration and the sadness that I felt. Like, if I didn't know and love God the way that I do and have the relationship,
it would be so easy to get off track.
It would be easy to switch into a mindset, say, yeah, I am gonna go riot. Yeah, I am gonna go beat up on a police car. Yes, I am. We need to go find these guys, and we need to. And I think recognizing that, hey, what is God saying about this matter? If we just take a moment to just be quiet and say, okay, God, what is this?
Yeah.
This is God saying, okay, y'all need to wake up, and y'all need to humble yourselves. You need to pray. You need to repent and return and turn from your wicked ways, so that I can hear you from heaven and I can heal the land.
And here's the thing: guess what? Black America needs to be humbled too, in the sense that we have to stop taking it into our own hands and take it to the Father, because as you can see, and
take a deep breath on that.
and that's not easy to do, but the reality of it is like I said, we've tried peaceful protest. We've tried violent protest. We've tried so many other things. And what is it going to take? It takes something. It's going to take...
It's going to take an act from God.
It's going to take an act of God to do it.
With the current state, whether that be politically, socioeconomically, racially, within this country, even just within the world, there's no way to get to a better place except for with God.
Right.
No vote is going to do it. No president is going to do it. It's only going to be God.
But let me be clear on this. I am not saying put a Jesus Band-Aid on it.
Yes.
Okay.
We're not putting Jesus Band-Aid on it.
So let me be clear. I'm not putting a Jesus Band-Aid and say that we should just lock ourselves inside churches and pray. And no, I'm not saying that. I am saying that you should educate yourself.
And be wise.
Educate yourself not only spiritually, but legally.
Yeah.
And in every other aspect that you can. Prepare your children, prepare your family. But when it comes to those moments, make sure that you have access to hear the voice of God. So that in those moments where you are fearful, that fear doesn't win. And you're not reacting out of fear, but you said, okay, God, this is a moment where I need you to step in.
And I think that's exactly kind of where we should be. One thing my husband always tells me, he goes, it's not about reacting to something. It's about stopping it from happening. It's about the way in which you prepare. You don't want to be a reactor to things. Right. You want to be able to be prepared. You want to be able to foresee things. So that's the position we have to position ourselves in. We need to, one, educate ourselves, spiritually, emotionally, educate our kids, build them up, teach them what to do and what to say and what not to do and what not to say, which is this really sad thing when you think about the fact that we have to do this. But
you can either do it or you can react in that moment, and you can try to defend yourself in that moment and find yourself unprepared and unfortunately dead.
Exactly. And so I think positioning ourselves in that way and then saying, okay, now I'm going to move wisely. Now I'm going to be vigilant. Now I'm going to do what I need to do as we go through this life. And I'm going to even based outside of like a personal level, just say, hey, like, how am I going to move politically?
Yeah.
How am I going to, because it's like it's election year. We have things coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, how am I going to move politically? Not just one way or the other. We all have our own political views. Yes. But what am I going to do? Am I going to vote for someone who is going to be considering policies that are actually helping my people, hurting my people, helping all people, hurting all people?
Yeah.
What am I not just the words that are coming out of your mouth, but the fruit that you're actually producing? Yeah. Because if you've produced fruit that have only cultivated more of this mess, why in the world would I vote for you?
Yeah.
Or what is that your policy? That's your agenda. What is it? Are
Right.
you
And
gonna...
I think once again, Black America has to get back to the point where we have to stop saying my vote doesn't matter.
Oh, my vote definitely matters.
My vote doesn't matter. Oh, well, it doesn't matter anyways. I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to do this. And that's part of education. And that's a piece of the puzzle of how we can begin to fight the system.
I think that's a piece of it. And then I think we also have to, quite honestly, we need... Now, I know we didn't even talk about this. Where are all the Black... Even if I just think Black Hollywood... I feel like they've been quite silent.
Yeah.
Quite when I think about my social media over the last couple of days, I don't really necessarily recall seeing a whole lot in Black Hollywood talking about this instance in this case, and particularly Black men in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Because we often see minority women in Hollywood come and they're concerned and they care. The Black women, the Latinas, the Asians, they're like gung-ho, we can't stand against this.
We're fighting this. Yes, I agree with that.
Where are the Black men? Where are the Denzel Washingtons and the Kevin Harts
hold on.
and the Don Cheadle?
I can defend Denzel on that.
Okay, no, I haven't seen any. Okay, but I'm just saying, where are all of the Black, the Black men coming to say, hey, we're taking a stand for this? Because quite honestly, if they don't take a stand for this, that means that they're choosing to separate themselves or their people because it may not apply to them because they've reached a certain
status or a certain level,
which is unacceptable.
But then once again, it pulls us back to the Colin Kaepernicks and the systematics that even hits that level to say that, okay, if you act out of line on this level, we will take your career.
And I think that's why I commend Colin. I'm like, hey, Colin, do I like everything that he does? No. But what I'm saying is he chose to say, I'm going to take a stand for something. And whether you take everything from me or not, I'm going to stand on it. Yeah. And I think his bravery and his boldness to do that has encouraged so many other athletes to do this. And unfortunately, they just made an example of him. But even LeBron James, he posted, I want to say it was maybe on Tuesday when all of this was coming in the news. He took a photo of the police officer with his knee in the back of the gentleman. And then he put it side by side with Colin Kaepernick kneeling. And he said, do you get it now? Are you really questioning why he was taking this step? He did. Exactly.
And and it takes those people in those platforms to do it and speak up because they are able to reach so much more. And I thank God for social media. Yeah. Because had there not been people out there with cell phones and complaining, they would have packed him up, sent him to the hospital, time of death, stamped it, and they would have went home.
Well, I mean, you would have if you heard about what their police report said. Their police report was falsified. Yeah. There were so many lies within their own police report about what was happening.
Yeah, and they were going to pack up and go home.
And how many times does this happen?
Well, we think about Ahmed. Yeah. And here's the thing. The man who shot him, the man and his son, was an ex-officer. And he was at home for 2 months before they finally made it an arrest because of everything that was going on with social media. But guess what? They still protected him because he was a former officer. What do you think is going to happen to these officers? Yes, they've been fired. But the system, as we know, is still going to protect them. Because they have to protect them because ultimately it's still protecting themselves. And the system doesn't want to say we're broken.
Well, all I can do on that one is just take that to the Lord. I mean, because quite honestly, you can only just say, hey, I hope that this broken system can somehow fix itself. And obviously we hear, things that are coming from the White House saying that, hey, we're doing an investigation in this through the FBI. It needs to be expedient because maybe these gentlemen will actually be convicted, even though there have been 0 convictions for all of these other police brutality cases that have led to Blacks being lynched.
Modern day lynchings.
So I can only say, you know what, God, I put my trust and my hope in you. And I think that's what we have to look to the hills, which comes our help. Yes, we have to be intentional about the way in which we do things and the way in which we move in the world and the way in which we interact with people of all race, religions, and creeds. But we have to also say, okay, God, I'm looking to you as my source. Yeah. Not the president, not my job, not society, not the, because if we allow what the world is bringing to us to impact the way in which we respond to things, we'll never be able to overcome. But we can be in a hurricane, just like Jesus when he was on the boat and it was rocking and there was a storm on the seas, and have peace in that, because knowing that, hey, I know who my Father is, I know what he's doing, I know that I'm looking to him. Jesus told his disciples, like, basically, like, why are y'all tripping?
Yeah.
Like, why are you guys tripping? You need to calm down and know who is with you. Know who is within you. Know what I have for you. So even in the middle of the storm, he's the peace. And knowing that we can get to that place of peace. And when we have peace, we can overcome. And nothing, the Bible says no weapon formed against us shall prosper. And that doesn't mean that it's not going to be in our face. That don't mean that it's not going to be scary.
It's not going to hurt.
Exactly. It means that in that moment, in that season, God is saying, hey, I'm never going to leave you nor forsake you.
You have to allow me to be your peace.
Exactly. And allow me to be your grace. And unfortunately, some people think that, well, how come bad things are still happening? God never said that we wouldn't be formed. He never said that we wouldn't face trials and tribulations. The Bible says that we will face trials and tribulations. He says that we will be persecuted. He says that we will come under fire. But what he was saying is, hey, who are you going to trust in this situation, in this scenario? Exactly. Because ultimately, the story in the Bible, if this is my thing. In the Bible, it's a huge story that God is saying, in every situation, I'm trying to remind you about who your creator is.
Yes.
And the story is that it is about me and my kingdom and my glory. So if you just let me be God in you and in your life,
apply God to the situation.
Apply God to every situation. I can be there and I can protect you and know that I'm always gonna have your back. Mm-hmm. I'm always gonna take you from grace to grace and from glory to glory, even though it doesn't look like it. Yeah. I'm just trying to show you how strong and mighty I am.
Yeah, and this is what I'm saying, that I think it's really hard to say in this moment, but Black America has to apply him, not just after the fact or not just in desperation moments, but it has to become, and as a people, we can say that the foundation is there, but it has to become a part of our culture and the way that we move and the way that we respond. If the grace and the love of God of us, here's the thing, I believe that the grace and the love of God and the Spirit of God in any moment can have the preeminence. But if you fight the preeminence or the presence of God in that moment, and you choose to put anger and your opinion and your hurt above what he's trying to say to you or give you directions to do in that moment as well, then you are fighting that battle alone. Yeah. And you're fighting it alone. And all I am saying is, I don't want us to have to fight it alone anymore. Because guess what? Like I said, we've tried so many other things. We've tried the peaceful protest. We've tried the non-peaceful protest. And I'm saying, look, we need to try Jesus. At the end of the day, we have to try Jesus and invite him into this situation. But I know we've been going for quite some time. I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. And I'm always so I don't want to say floored, but I just love hearing the depth of you. And it means so much to me that we're able to sit and talk and have these good conversations. And I pray for you and I pray for your family, because I know in seeing what's going on, it does hit differently. But I thank God that we are applying him to the situation, and we are inviting him in to keep a hedge around us. Amen. And to everything concerning us. But guys, once again, we just want to thank you guys for listening. And I want to encourage you, if you have comments or you have something that you'd like to talk about further in regards to these issues, please let us know. Let's talk about it. But I will say this, I don't want this to be a platform where we are just discussing these type of events in anger or in bitterness. But if you have a solution, if you have something that you believe is going to be helpful and uplifting in these times, please feel free to share. We would love to hear from you guys. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.